Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, the one-day deferred, aspiring to be viral, properly caffeinated, style points accruing weekly YouTube show all about Notre Dame football and the angst and exuberance that comes with it. I'm Eric Hansen, not in my TV clothes. He's Tyler James, never in his TV clothes. Ahead on the show tonight, the newest college football playoff rankings come out just after we close the show. But we're going to spin forward into what the final rankings and seedings might look like and the best and worst case scenarios for Notre Dame as far as opponents. Northern Illinois won't be in the playoff, but the loss to the Huskies was a turning point for the Irish on many levels. We'll take a look at where ND has improved the most on the field and on the sideline since then. We'll also break down Saturday's USC matchup, the key injuries for the Irish, the place kicking situation, recruiting, we've got that too, and your questions. This is Never Sleeps.
All right, well done, Eric. The Inside ND Sports Podcast is presented by MyBookie. I don't know about you, Eric, but I'll be doing plenty of stuffing my face on Thanksgiving, but I'm hoping to stuff my wallet as well. And MyBookie has a bunch of delicious promos to help us all do that. On Thanksgiving Day, MyBookie is boosting the odds on running back Devon Achane to score the first touchdown in Dolphins versus Packers. If he scores first, you cash in big. If he doesn't, MyBookie has your back with a full refund. How's that for a no-lose bet? Also, as of this Monday, MyBookie's Telegram prize pool contest has now kicked off. The pool starts at $15,000 and grows by $5,000 for every 1,000 new subscribers. All you have to do is join the Telegram channel by December 1st to lock in your share. And if you're already subscribed, you're automatically in. The more subscribers, the bigger winning. So spread the word to keep piling up that jackpot. So let's review the Thanksgiving game plan. Load up your plate, grab your phone, and lock in your picks. MyBookie's giving you risk-free football action, a shot at a growing prize pool. And if you're new to the family, they'll double your deposit with our promo code INDS. You can click the link in our podcast description to sign up. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with MyBookie.
And Football Never Sleeps is brought to you by MyBookie too. You said Inside ND Sports Podcast.
Oh, no.
They're sponsoring everything. They're sponsoring Tyler's Thanksgiving dinner. You can't lose.
Yeah, they're sponsoring the podcast and Football Never Sleeps. We appreciate the sponsorships of both. My apologies for saying the wrong thing. We recorded both in the same day, and that never happens. So I'm lost. But I know I'm in front of a camera, so I won't pick my nose, which I can do freely on the Inside ND Sports Podcast.
I hate to follow that up with, we want to thank Steve Lundgren for the music tonight, too, as always. All right, here we go. We are going to do our opening drive tonight, and it's all about the college football playoff. And you say, well, that's coming up right after you guys. Yeah, but we can spin forward a little bit farther in that. We're going to take a look at what the best and worst case scenarios are and a lot of other aspects of this. But let's start with this. The AP and the UPI, the AP and the coaches polls came out on Sunday. Notre Dame was fifth in both of those. I really think tonight when the CFP comes out, Notre Dame's either going to be fourth or fifth in the rankings, which means sixth or seventh in the seedings. So, Tyler, assuming Notre Dame wins on Saturday at USC, what's the best case scenario and the worst case scenario you feel in terms of final seeding, which is December 8th?
I think it's 5 as the best case scenario. I don't necessarily think that's very likely, but I think it could happen. And to me, the path would be Notre Dame. I think this is how Notre Dame gets to 5. Ohio State loses to Michigan. Penn State loses in the Big Ten championship, and therefore Notre Dame jumps both of those teams. I think that is the only way that Notre Dame can get to 5. I'm not quite sure. Like Ohio State lost to Oregon, I don't think will get Notre Dame ahead of Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. And so that is the best case scenario. I don't think that's necessarily likely. Obviously, if you just follow the track, I don't think Michigan's going to beat Ohio State. But I think that's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, I don't think this would happen, but there's a world that Notre Dame could be 9. I don't think it's a likely one. I think the committee would have to do things that I don't think they will do. That would, I think the way I mapped it out now, this of course,
I can't wait to see that map.
Well, Ohio State would win the Big Ten championship.
Okay.
So that drops Oregon to 5.
Okay. That still isn't going to knock Notre Dame seeding down, though.
No.
You said 9.
Right. But Penn State stays ahead of Notre Dame. Let me finish my work first.
Okay.
And its record strengthened because Ohio State's better. Indiana's record strengthened because Ohio State's better. I think Indiana would have to stay ahead of Notre Dame tonight in the seedings, which I don't think would happen. But I think in this scenario, this is how I'm imagining it getting there. And then Texas somehow stayed ahead of Notre Dame after losing to Georgia in the SEC championship game. I'm not saying this is what I think will happen, but this is the worst case scenario that if all those outcomes happen, I can see the committee convincing itself of those things based on the outcomes that I laid out there.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm sorry that I didn't exclude the scenarios in which the committee brought Jose Cuervo into the conversation.
Well, I don't like trusting the committee to begin with, so I don't.
I know a lot of people don't.
When you say best and worst case, my head's going to go to the best and worst case.
Yeah, I think realistically, we're looking at the 5 through 7 slots. I think 6 now is the most likely final ranking. I'm not saying necessarily tonight. There are people that think Notre Dame and Penn State are going to flip-flop. Notre Dame will have a stronger strength of schedule now that you add Army in and you add Minnesota to Penn State's ledger, and then the fact that Penn State only won by 1 point. And then even if you look at the last week, there will be a comparative point between Penn State and Notre Dame, and Penn State only beat USC by 3 points in overtime. So Notre Dame basically has to just do that, just win, and that would be comparative. And Penn State has Maryland next week, so that's not going to give them any schedule octane. So we'll move past the best in case.
Well, hold on. I wanted to follow up one thing with you there. Okay. You, when you said realistic, you included 5 for Notre Dame. Do you think that is really realistic?
I think it's very slim. I think you kind of laid out how that could happen. There needs to be some chaos, and we have seen chaos in the last few weeks. I mean, who would have thought not only did Oklahoma beat Alabama, but they kind of stomped them. I would never have in a million years picked that game. So could Michigan beat Ohio State in a rivalry game? Possible. Could Purdue beat Indiana? No. Could I think Oregon's, I'm trying to remember who Oregon has. I think they have Washington. I mean, that's not likely, but I mean, there are scenarios where those teams, some of the teams that are ahead of Notre Dame could lose. Texas could lose to Texas A&M, for example. Now, I don't know that that would help Notre Dame move up to 5. We're really talking about the Big Ten teams eliminating themselves. Could Penn State lose to Maryland? I don't think so. So it really would revolve around Ohio State losing to Michigan, I think, or Oregon losing to Washington. But yeah, I think it's very slim that Notre Dame gets up to that 5 spot.
And I mean, I guess we don't know for sure, but I think we feel that if Ohio State does lose to Oregon, that it still wouldn't drop behind Notre Dame, right? I mean, we're sort of guessing with that. We don't really have an idea what they would do if the same team loses to the number 1
I think margin of victory would factor into that, and also Notre Dame's margin of victory if they were to beat USC. I think they would kind of look at those two things,
right,
and try. But I am not confident Ohio State would drop behind Notre Dame. I'm trying to think if they would in my AP poll, and I would have to just see it play out first.
Right.
Okay. Are we done putting me through the cross-examination?
Yes. Sorry. Okay. Well, you made me come up with a scenario, so I had to.
I know. Okay, here we go. So if Indy wins Saturday, is there any way the Irish don't host the playoff game? You tried to come up with a scenario, so you came up with a pretty remote one. I think it's 0% chance they would not host if they beat USC. I just don't think that there's a scenario that would do that, but you do, and we'll consider that. Would ND have a legit chance to make the playoff in the old 4-team format?
I think so. I do think in that scenario, I wonder if Miami, or I think honestly SMU would have the better case, would get in over Notre Dame as a 1-loss ACC champ. Because SMU has a similar win, or beat Louisville, which Notre Dame lost to.
They both beat Louisville.
They both beat Louisville. Sorry.
Their comparative scores against opponents, I think they have 4, are pretty similar.
Right. So I think SMU's, and then SMU would have a win over Miami, which obviously that would devalue that, because Miami wouldn't be as good once they lost to SMU. But I think that would be the debate. And it would be interesting, like if back-to-back years the ACC got left out in that scenario. Because to me, I think it's in a 14 playoff. It's the Big Ten champ, it's the SEC champ, and then probably the Big Ten runner-up. I think that's what the playoff. 3 of the 4 teams would be in the playoff, and then Notre Dame, and then maybe.
So you would rule out Penn State in that. You would rule out a 3rd Big Ten team getting in.
Yeah, I don't think 3 teams would get in from the same conference in a 14 playoff. It'd be hard for me to imagine.
So you think the committee would rank the teams differently in a 4 playoff format? I realize there's seedings, but you think they'd make a different decision even in the rankings?
Well, I mean, I don't know what at the final ranking. Yes, the whole pony show that we've been doing these every week. I don't care what they've been doing. All that matters is the final ranking, and they can make up whatever reason they want to say, you know what, Penn State doesn't deserve to be in there. We want to reward someone else instead.
I would say the committee has not had a deep record of doing that, but they did the first year because those teams from the Big 12, I think it was TCU, and I'm trying to think who the other team was, and then Ohio State goes jumping in there. Now they did win the Big Ten championship by a lot, but those other teams didn't lose. I don't know. And I think it would be a Penn State Notre Dame debate. That's assuming Texas wins out. That's assuming Ohio State either beats Oregon or loses by 1 point with the quarterback sliding down with no time left on the clock.
Yeah, I think it would impact the way you ranked teams if you knew you were only ranking 4. I think the conversations are probably different a little bit, because I feel like, okay, this is 4 and 5 is the delineation that we have to, obviously it's not the decision they have to make when they're ranking it for the first time, but I think that's always in mind. So I do think you would be less bullish on a team that you think, well, what happens if they win out here against a bunch of nobodies? Will we be stuck having to put them in the playoff because we put them up here so early? So I do think they would never admit to that, but I do think the rankings would probably look a little bit different on the week-to-week basis than they have with this 12-team format.
Okay, let's get to a couple more here before we go to the first round of questions. Lots of chatter already about getting rid of the top 4 seedings for conference champs. Like it, hate it, need to see another year of this.
I don't like getting rid of something after just 1 year. I'd like for us to have more data, get a better sense of things. I think the conferences have their own sort of sorting out to do to get a better sense of how this works out too. And I think what we're probably going to end up happening is that they're making changes within maybe even the conferences in terms of how they do conference schedules to sort of apply to a playoff format that maybe isn't happening now. Maybe they will have the foresight to say, hey, we're going to change this in 2 years, so maybe this doesn't matter, and we want to have all these teams with 1 loss or 2 losses in the debate for playoff seeds, and especially the Big Ten and SEC wanting to get as many guarantees into the field as it can. So I personally want to see more of it. I don't think that it's time to quite get rid of it.
I would agree. Now, the time to get rid of it would be after 2 years. There is going to be a new contract in 2026. They've already talked about a 14-team playoff that year, which would mean 2 buys in that format. And so that I think let it play out these first 2 years. I think that's the right way to go with that. How deep is the pool of teams that could legitimately win the title this year, in your opinion, and is Notre Dame in it? And let's look at the AP rankings if you want to. That might be easier for people to understand than doing the seedings, because we have teams ranked lower in the seedings than, and so
you're
I'm
right.
getting verklempt.
I'll fill in. I don't have the poll in front of me, so I don't know the numbers that would be associated with these teams.
Okay,
but to me, the I guess the real contenders for the college football playoff title, in my opinion, is only 4 deep. I think it's Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia. I'm not sure that it legitimately extends beyond those 4. I think the tier after that is Tennessee and Notre Dame. And then a tier after that is whoever gets in from the ACC, Penn State, and Indiana.
Interesting.
That is how I see it.
Okay.
I'm not sure that anyone else can win as many games as it would be required to win the playoff. That's where I think the best of the best will separate themselves. Because it's like you can see updates on a weekly basis, but I think it's going to be hard to get someone, even though we don't feel like they're dominant teams. I still think those top teams are better on average on a weekly basis than the teams that they will they would play against.
Fair enough. Where I drew the line, where I drew the line was between 7 and 8 in the AP poll. So I'll remind people who the top 7 are: Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, Georgia, and Tennessee. Then there's the line. Then we have Miami, SMU, Indiana, and I mean, there's teams. I think Ole Miss would have even with their weird 3 losses, I think they might go farther in the tournament than some other teams. But I think the line is between 7 and 8, and I think this is the deepest I can remember drawing that line. I don't think all those teams are equal, but I think they all have a chance based on matchups. You know, if you get the right pathway, especially with these conference champions getting buys, if you play either the 3rd or the 4th seed in the quarterfinals, that's maybe an easier matchup than your first round matchup was.
Yeah, but you still got to win 2 more.
You do,
that's what the real playoff was. And I think we always got the right champion in the college football, the 4-team playoff. Like I don't know that we rarely got the wrong champion when someone has to win 2 games to win the title.
Well, I also think there's been more parity this year too in college football, and I think the playing now we'll see. I mean, we'll get to the playoff, and you can gloat if you're right, and I can remind you on Football Never Sleeps if you're wrong. But that's kind of how I see it, and I think this next question is going to be really interesting, given who you identified as one of the contenders and who I think Notre Dame would want to draw. So which team would you want to avoid if you're the Irish early in the bracket, and which teams are maybe the most vulnerable to what Notre Dame does well? And let's eliminate, Boise and the Big 12 champ, and just look at teams that really have a more legitimate that would be in the quarterfinals. Those 12 and 11 I don't think are going to make the quarterfinals.
Yeah, I think the ones that I would want to avoid are those 4 that I think are the contenders.
Well, give me one. Give me the one you'd want to avoid the most, and then of the kind of 8 to 10 teams that are left that you could face in a quarterfinal, who'd you say, I'll take my chances with them?
I would probably say It's a coin flip between Oregon and Ohio State. I'm not sure that I have a strong opinion one way or the other. Honestly, I didn't spend as much time breaking down their stats because I felt like those were the teams that I didn't think Notre Dame would fare well against. So I don't know enough about how Ohio State ranks statistically versus Oregon.
Okay,
so
well,
those,
I'll
so
tell
those
you
would be
who
the two.
I'll tell you who I think. I think Ohio State is the team you want to stay away from.
Okay.
The vulnerability with Ohio State at this point is that they had to reshuffle their offensive line because of injuries. But defensively, they're a pain in the butt. They're good at everything on defense. Offensively, they do almost everything well. They're not as prolific as a running team as, let's say, Notre Dame. And they're decent in turnover margin. Oregon is a pretty average running team. They're a much worse run defense than Ohio State. But the team I think is the one, this is the one where you and I are going to differ on, is Georgia. I would be okay with Notre Dame playing Georgia in a quarterfinal and feel okay about that. Even given Notre Dame's history against SEC teams on big stages, Georgia came into last week 103rd in rushing offense, and they were in the 40s in almost every offensive category. Not very good on third down, turned the ball over a ton. And then defensively, they're not special this year. They're 14th in total defense. That's the best thing that they do, but run defense and pass efficiency defense, they're not better than Notre Dame. Now, I know that they've played a tougher schedule, and these numbers are skewed by that somewhat, but they're putty in the red zone. I mean, there's not a lot that they can hang their hat on other than their brand name. I think Georgia is a team that I would take my chances with, and they've been inconsistent this year. Yes, at their best, they can be a pain in the butt, but when we're breaking down all these teams, that's the one I think is maybe people are overrating them a little bit.
Yeah, but I agree with that. They are not statistically intimidating, but would it surprise you at all if they won the title?
If they don't have a bye, if they don't beat Texas and have a bye as the number 2 seed, yes, I would be surprised. If they came from the group that has to play the extra game, I would be.
I understand. Like, to me, like, that's a team. Okay, just force Carson Beck into bad decisions, and that's your path to victory. And
I think they have trouble scoring on Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame would have trouble moving the ball against Georgia, even with their deficiencies. But I think Georgia would have trouble scoring on Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think they have the biggest delta. Like, they could, I could see a lot of teams beating them, but I could see them beating everyone too. Like, they are, and maybe, like, I think maybe Notre Dame.
I did draw them on the line of being a contender. I have them above the line, so I'm not ruling them out. I'm just saying, of those really good teams, if you said, who do you want? And I think it would surprise people because of the brand name. People just remember what Georgia has been in the last few years, and they're like, Georgia, no.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm ordering the 4, I would probably put Georgia 4th of those 4 that I said in terms of who Notre Dame would match up best against. I just would not wish for that in any way if I'm Notre Dame.
I'd wish for another shot at Northern Illinois to get revenge if they put them in the playoff, but they're not. Why don't we go to some questions, Tyler, and then we can get into some of our other topics.
All right. Well, there's a lot of Thanksgiving talk, so we got to catch up. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Outbound says, favorite Thanksgiving side dish?
Mine would require too long of a story, so I will say sweet potatoes, but there's another one that involves my grandpa that's a very personal story that would take too long to tell, and you guys would be bored to tears.
I don't think we'd be bored to tears, but you might get close to tears, so we won't make you tell it. I think stuffing is my favorite. I'm a big stuffing guy. In the bird, out of the bird, doesn't matter to me. I'm a stuffing number one.
The bird is the word.
The bird is the word as well. All right. Bob Oxner says USC's team reportedly got hit hard with the flu last week. Does our team get flu shots or otherwise takes precautions to try to avoid stay out of facility protocols, mask, hand sanitizer, etc.?
I have no idea. they have a performance team and they look at all kinds of things like that. So they're not doing things willy-nilly. But I also know, I remember during COVID, there were some people that didn't want to get the vaccine. And so I don't know that you could make somebody get a flu shot. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any requirement, but I'm sure there are policies in place of like, hey, if you're sick, we'll just stay away. We don't want you to be around. I'm sure they have all kinds of
My
things in place
granddaughter's sick and it
to take care of
canceled our
that.
lunch date at the IHOP, which is what she picked out.
And I mean, it's hard to avoid once you get a couple players with it. It's going to be hard to avoid because players live with each other too. It's not like they only run into each other at the facility. They're roommates and they eat together. They do all kinds of things together. All right, Brian Havermill says 2,838 yards is the number of rushing yards the Irish had in 1988. The current Irish have 2,440. Can you remember a team that could run the ball like this one? Quentin Nelson teams, maybe.
So the school record for rushing yards per carry was the Quentin Nelson 2017 team. They hold the school record. This team, if you go out to the fourth decimal place, is just one tick higher than that, or I think it's 4 ticks higher in the fourth decimal place. I did a item on that earlier in the week. So they are on a trajectory to set the school record, provided that they don't have to go out to 27 decimal places. But that's where they stand. In terms of sheer volume, they're not as high as that 2017 team, but they're up there. They're 11th in the country in rushing offense, but they're third in yards per carry, which is pretty impressive. And they are around 6.3 yards a carry.
I was trying to remember which teams you said were among the top 20 in run deep. Oh, it's been NIU, Miami of Ohio, and
those are total defense.
Oh, it was total defense. I thought it was run defense when we were talking to Pete Byrne on the podcast earlier today. So I was trying.
I can tell you which they are.
I know. I know that 2017. I think it's 2017, right? The Quentin Nelson team.
Yeah.
That team wasn't able to run the ball against its best defensive opponents. And Notre Dame hasn't played a truly elite defense, I don't think, this season. Texas A&M was probably the most imposing defense that Notre Dame's played this year. Rushed for 198 yards against that team. Northern Illinois limited Notre Dame to 123. Louisville limited it to 117. That number is a little bit skewed based on like the fields that Notre Dame played in terms of its defense turning Louisville over and Notre Dame having some short fields, but Notre Dame didn't necessarily run the ball extremely well that day either. So
in terms of run defense, I mean, Army is the best statistically at 10th. Right. And Northern Illinois is pretty high in that group as well. They're 23rd. Georgia Tech is 32nd. I can tell you who's in the playoff mix, who's really good at it. Indiana's 1, Ohio State's 3, SMU 5, Tennessee 6, Penn State 7. So Texas is 13. So those are the teams that would be harder to run the ball against. And yet I think Notre Dame is getting to the point with its offensive line. I think early in the year that would have been maybe not checkmate, but a hard check. And I think Notre Dame is able to overcome that because of the growth of the offensive line, because of the growth of other parts of the offense. I'm not saying it would be easy to do it, but I think early in the year they'd be in checkmate against those teams because they'd be able to shut down the run.
Yeah, I think like much like yes, the Quentin Nelson 2017 team with Josh Adams was a good running team at running the ball. I think they were somewhat ended up being defined by when they weren't able to run the ball. And so I think this team will also, in a way, be defined by what it's able to do in these next opportunities in terms of running
Brandon
the ball.
Wimbush was the quarterback, and there are some similarities there.
Right. And so, yeah, you have the added benefit of Riley Leonard contributing to the running game as well. All right. Jeff Stevens says, given that Zachariah Branch has both a punt and kickoff return for a touchdown, what could Notre Dame do with the kicking game to neutralize his threat? Thanks. Can't make it live tonight.
I mean, Eric Goins could kick touchbacks as much as he can. I mean, they faced him before, and then, again, punt it and go cover it, I guess is the best way to put it. I mean, if he had a touchdown every time he touched it, I'd be a little bit more concerned about it. But I mean, Notre Dame has done a really good job lately of covering the kickoffs and the punts. So I'm not sure what more you can do.
Yeah, I mean, I think trying to pin him to the sidelines, you could exaggerate the hang time. I think those are the things you could do. Obviously, with kickoffs, it's just touchbacks. Just don't let it. Just don't kick it in the field of play. So I think Notre Dame will be aware of that, and we'll have a plan for it. We'll see if James Rendell has gotten to the point where he can execute something more than just get rid of it, because that was part of the problem early in the season, is that some of the other things they were asking him to do, he wasn't able to sort of do. And then his whole punting performance sort of sagged because of that.
He's not listed as one of the top 50 punt returners. So,
all right. Outbound asked, this was related to the playoff conversation, what about the SEC looking to just start their own thing?
Why don't you answer that first? Because I'm trying to find his numbers. I can't find him among the leaders in either of those categories.
Maybe it's career stats. I know Branch has returned punts and kicks in the past, but yeah, I don't know what his season stats are for that.
You can go ahead and answer that question. I'm going to look it up here.
In terms of the SEC starting their own thing, I don't think anyone would take, no one's going to take that seriously. But I mean, that's what, if they want that, that's the SEC championship. They already have that. I don't think it'll happen. It would have to. Now the SEC and the Big Ten could try to do that themselves, but I think there are too many historically prominent football programs that are not in the SEC that it just wouldn't be viable and wouldn't become a thing. Now I think what the SEC and the Big Ten will continue to do is sort of flex their strength in terms of defining what the future college football landscape looks like. But I can't imagine a world where it's just like the SEC is what dictates everything. I think that's unrealistic.
Okay. Branch is averaging under 6 yards a punt return this year, and he's averaging 21 yards for kickoff returns. He's not even their number one kickoff return guy. Lemon is. Trying to see what Notre Dame's numbers are in those categories. I almost think Max Hurleman has a better average than that.
So Notre Dame's game plan should just be copy what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, do whatever they do to Max Hurleman.
No, do what everyone else has done to Zachariah
Max
Branch.
Hurleman has a better punt return average than Branch does this year.
All right, there you go.
And then kickoff returns, Jaden Harrison has a better average than Branch does. So I would do whatever people are doing in Notre Dame.
No, it's not whatever. No, whatever the opponents of USC have been doing to Zachariah Branch is what they need to be doing.
Okay, yeah, watch film.
just repeat what everyone else is already doing.
Go to the next question.
You were too deep in the numbers to understand what I was trying to say. All right, Scott Fegan says, guys, what scares you the most about USC? What are their strengths, special teams, pass offense, ...
Yeah, I would say, I mean, not even looking at their stats, I think the thing that's scariest about them is how much skill they have on offense. I mean, that's kind of been their signature with Lincoln Riley. They're not as prolific as they have been, but they still have lots of good wide receivers. Marks is a really good running back. The quarterbacks are adequate. I mean, they're not Caleb Williams. I don't even know that Caleb Williams is Caleb Williams anymore. Is he? Tyler, you're the Bears fan.
He had a really good game, even though they lost against the Vikings the other day.
So, but that's USC's signature. I mean, defense, they're okay. They protect the quarterback well. If you get into a turnover game with them, though, you could get beat because they have been in every game. Their biggest loss is 7 points, and that's at Minnesota. So, I mean, they've been competitive. They were competitive with a team that the committee going into tonight thought was one spot better than Notre Dame, and that's Penn State. So they took them to overtime. So, I mean, they're not a pushover at all. But the things they do well, are some of the things Louisville did well, and that's a really good passing offense.
Yeah, USC's passing offense doesn't have the same type of skill at the receiver position, in my opinion, as it has in recent years. But they're still talented. Like I'm sure Notre Dame would be happy to have USC's receivers. So that is the biggest concern is slowing down that passing offense. I do think the running backs are better, and I think they probably should. I think USC's problem is they're not balanced enough offensively.
They're not.
And that puts them in a position where they're throwing too much. And then the reason Miller Moss isn't playing anymore, in my opinion, is because he was turning the ball over too much. And that opened the door for a quarterback change there. So if USC is protecting the football, that makes them more dangerous. And so Notre Dame's got to be consistent with its pass rush and try to force Jaden Mayava into some bad decisions because he hasn't made a bunch of them yet. I think he only has one interception in the 2 starts this year. And I want to say he had 8 last year as a starter, whereas I think Miller Moss was up to 10 by the time he got benched. So that's been one of the things that has hamstrung USC this season is untimely turnovers. All right, Brian Habermill says, how many snaps does KVA usually play? Can Preston Zinter play those snaps?
It depends if they play a lot of nickel versus not playing a lot of nickel. Against USC, they wouldn't play 3 linebackers very often. So I would say he would be in the 20s in snaps had he played. Can Zinter play those snaps? He was at 17 for the Army game. And Army had, I believe, 69 plays, which is about probably what USC will run. But I don't think they want to do that. I think they'll spread it out more among the other 4, and then Zinter will play probably under 10 snaps is my guess.
Yeah, I think Zinter would be more of an emergency guy than a guy that's a planned part of the game plan. He becomes the 5th linebacker for Notre Dame, but I don't think that his snap count will be very high unless it's a lopsided game or an injury forces that beyond Notre Dame's current rotation. So KVA is definitely a loss. I think he brings some things to some versatility to that linebacker unit in different ways. But Jalen Sneed and Jaden Osbury, who I think will be put under more pressure and given more responsibilities as a result. I think they're playing well lately. I think they played well against Army. Now, obviously, it's a big transition for those guys in terms of the type of offense Notre Dame's playing.
Was it Golden that mentioned how well Jalen Sneed had been practicing?
Golden mentioned that. Yeah, he mentioned Jalen Sneed like on his own. It wasn't someone he was asked about. He brought him up specifically when talking about the linebackers. So that's always a good sign. All right, speaking of Golden, Jay Golden 44 says, can this kicker improve before the playoffs, or do we just go for it every time?
So I think Tyler and I might be a little bit mixed on this. Since Mitch Jeter got hurt in the Stanford game, Notre Dame is 3 of 10 on field goals, and that includes some of Jeter kicking. That's 1 for 4 from him, 2 for 5 from Zach Yoakum, and 0 for 1 from Marcello Diamede. What kind of sold me, I asked Marcus Freeman about Mitch on Monday, and it wasn't exactly a word salad, but I mean, he seemed encouraged by where Mitch Jeter was. And so I had a chance to talk to Marty Biaggi, the special teams coordinator, on Monday night, which is why we didn't have Football Never Sleeps, because we had our coordinator and player interviews on Monday night. And we appreciate everybody coming tonight. We have a big live audience tonight. So thank you everybody for sticking with us. I was more confident after hearing him talk and why he was confident. The reason they let him try the 48-yarder was because he was doing so much better on the extra points. They could see the ball so much higher on the net. And when he did try the 48-yarder, it was his old strike. He was striking the ball the way he did pre-injury. Before, he was just kind of trying to punch it through. It wasn't his normal kicking motion. So they were very encouraged by that. The block, they said, was not his fault. And so I think they're pretty encouraged by what they're going to get out of Mitch Jeter. Now, again, you could always have setbacks, but he's incrementally gotten better and better with his injury. So I think they feel pretty good about him trying longer field goals against USC in pressure situations. They feel like he's definitely the best option. And then he'll have a chance to heal up some going into the playoff.
Yeah,
or the Pop-Tarts Bowl for those who are pessimistic.
Yeah, or worried that we're jinxing things. I understand. I think Mitch Jeter can get back on track. I don't think that's a far-fetched idea. But I am concerned. Like I think it has to happen. Like I don't care if he hit it well. He didn't make the field goal. That's all that matters. Like no one else is graded on like whether or not he had good form throwing it. If Riley Leonard throws it to the wrong person, he's going to get a bad mark for throwing it to the wrong person, whether or not he did it with the right form.
I think but Tyler, I think it's incremental. I'm not trying to sell you that everything's roses, but you got a guy that missed 2 field goals in his career at South Carolina. So from the mental standpoint, I think he can handle this. And he was able to kick in SEC venues and he was reliable, yes, except for the 2 blocks against Northern Illinois in a Notre Dame uniform. Now, physically, is he ready? I mean, I have to go with a guy that was a college kicker, and that's a special teams coach. I don't know why he would spin it any other way unless they want USC not to, worry about it. Say, we don't need to block it. He'll miss it on his own. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, as it relates to that, like I don't. To me, it's as much telling that they're saying Mitch Jeter's our best option. So why would they say, well, he needs to do a way better job? Like, I don't think they're going to be as critical about him when they feel like he's their best option, because they need to get that confidence up in him to say, yes, hey, we're not changing you. We're sticking with you. We need you to make the kicks, and we believe you can. So that's the part where it's like, well, yeah, I don't know what else they would say. If Mitch Jeter is their best option, which I think we all agree, like that doesn't necessarily mean he's playing at his best right now. And I just think kicking feels like such a mental, like I'm no kicking expert by any means, but it seems like
come on, you're a great kicking expert.
It seems like such a mental game that you got to see the ball go through the uprights on Saturdays for you to get some of that confidence back. I mean, we talk about it like with guys that have come back from injuries all the time, that the confidence that you have to come back, that you don't really realize what you're not confident in until you go out and do it. And then you're like, oh, okay, that went fine. Now maybe Mitch Jeter is giving that kind of feedback, and that's not leading to the misses that he's had. But I think from as a neutral observer, there's reason to be concerned, just because he hasn't executed at a high level in quite some time. Now, his history indicates that that he's fully capable of doing that. But I would feel much more comfortable if he went out and made 2 field goals against USC before going into the playoff than if he didn't. All right. Brian Habermill says, when you say word salad, what do you mean, Eric?
Okay. So a word salad is a way to say nothing but give you a lot of fiber. So if I asked Tyler if he feels like working on Friday, and he says a whole bunch of words and none of it has any substance,
none
or
of it
has
is
very
yes or
little
no
substance, or he doesn't answer the question directly, that's a word salad.
Yeah. All right. Jay Golden 44 says, what happened to Wes Pritchett's son? Did Notre Dame not recruit him?
You go ahead and take that one. I think I know the answer here, but
they did not, and he has more than one son. I'm trying to make sure I get all their names. Marshall is one of them, and I would have to look it up. Marshall is a tight end. I believe he's committed to Alabama now.
Right. And he wasn't at North Carolina initially.
Yeah, he had been committed to North Carolina at some point, and then he has another son who was a linebacker, and I don't know his name offhand. But Notre Dame did not offer either Pritchett's son. They were aware of him. I think both of them camped at Notre Dame at some point, but Notre Dame opted to. Lawson Pritchett is the other, is the older brother there, and there might be a third one too that's younger, but. I'm speaking too much about the Pritchett family that I don't know all the ins and outs of, but Notre Dame did not recruit with an offer either the Pritchett son to have been college football recruits. All right, Scott Fegan says, is this a game that Mitchell Evans can dominate, or do we look to Jaden Harrison or Jordan Faison? I expect Notre Dame will continue to run, but curious about the pass game.
I mean, it was interesting talking to Riley Leonard last night because somebody asked him, are you surprised that there were so many different guys catching balls, that there's so much parity?
That was me again.
Okay. And he was surprised. He's like, yeah, that is kind of weird. So, I mean, he is really trained to take what the defense is giving him. So I don't know that he has a security blanket on this team. I think Evans would be a good one. So if USC's defense allows for the tight ends to have some good routes, I think we'll see Evans. If not, I think we'll see, Bo Collins may be the guy. It may be none of the above that have the most receptions in the game. And I think that was the case in the Army game. Wasn't Bo Collins the leading receiver in that game? So, but I think Evans is going to be a consistent contributor in the USC game, and however Notre Dame goes in the postseason, however far they get, I think Mitch Evans is going to be part of that.
Yeah, Collins was 4 for 37 as a receiver, so he led in receptions. Faison had more receiving yards with 46 on 2 receptions. But yeah, the numbers for Notre Dame's pass catchers this year, Collins leads the way with 34 catches, and then there's 8 guys that have at least 14 catches. Faison has 14, Jaden Thomas has 14, Chris Mitchell has 16, Jaden Harrison 17, Jeremiah Love 19, Mitchell Evans 24, and Jaden Greathouse 25. So I think it's very unpredictable where Notre Dame's going to go with the ball in this passing game. And
that's good for Notre Dame.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, I think there is some, like, it is nice to, like, hey, I can trust Bo Collins to go make this play or whatever. I think early on in the season, that was maybe something that hurt Notre Dame's passing offenses, where it seemed like Riley Leonard trusted Bo Collins, but I don't know that he trusted everyone else as much as he trusted Bo Collins. And I feel like that trust has increased with those other guys. And I think that it has benefited Notre Dame's passing game. All right. That's it on the question front, Eric.
Okay. We wanted to get to the Northern Illinois aftermath. Where have we seen the most progress since Northern Illinois?
Yeah, so I think that passing game is a big part of that. Riley Leonard has more confidence and comfortability throwing the ball. Like I just mentioned, I think Notre Dame's more well-rounded with its targets than it was back then. The offensive line is better. There's more stability. The Army game, I think, may have been Notre Dame's best offensive line performance of the season. There's still room for improvement. I'd like to see that against the elite defenses, although I know Army is statistically elite. And then I think Notre Dame's run defense is better. I think the linebackers are more confident and comfortable. I think they understand their roles better than they did then. And I think the defensive line keeps coming up with answers, even though there's been a lot of injury issues. But they've really risen to the occasion throughout. And the secondary, I think, has been sort of solid throughout. So it's been that front seven, I think, that's made the biggest gains defensively for Notre Dame.
So what I did was every week I do this with Notre Dame and all its opponents. I chart 24 statistics, 9 on offense, 9 on defense, 5 special teams, and then turnover margin. And I look back at where Notre Dame was ranked on September 7th at the end of the day after losing to Northern Illinois. Of those 24 stats, Notre Dame has improved in 22 of them, and some off the charts improvement. Now, again, you got a small sample size, so there's going to be skewed stats, but the two that they didn't improve in were red zone offense and kickoff returns. The four that I feel like are the most significant are turnover margin, which hurt Notre Dame in the Northern Illinois game. They went from number 67 in the country to number 2. Total defense, they went from 72nd to 4th. And that pulls all the elements. So Tyler talked about run defense. I do think that's important. They were 100th after the Northern Illinois game. Rushing offense, 69th to 11th. I think they're a much better running team. And pass efficiency, 129 to number 48. Of those, Tyler, of the different elements, you mentioned you want to see offensive line play against a good team. Are there other elements that you are, I don't want to say skeptical, but curious about how that would stand up against a playoff team?
I still think the passing game's in that conversation too. Like I'm not,
I do.
I don't have enough confidence yet that the passing game can go out and sort of win a game for Notre Dame against a top defense. So those are the things that I think are the most troubling. I mean, defensively, the run defense I still think is a little bit of a concern. I'm not as concerned anymore. And I don't know. It's tough because it's like, wow, they did such a good job against Army and Navy, but it's like, well, I mean, that doesn't, yes, that's good, but it's not necessarily applicable in the same way. Like I think what hurts Notre Dame a lot against more traditional offenses, or I guess modern offenses, I guess if you're talking about the option would be more traditional, that the threat of the runner pass is the same on every play, where it's not necessarily that against an option offense. And that Notre Dame's defense can be maybe overcompensating to stop the pass, and then give up some yards on the ground. And that is an area that I think Notre Dame will have to continue to prove itself. But I do think it has improved, so I'm not as worried about that. To me, I still think the offensive line and the passing game are the two biggest question marks, and maybe special teams to some extent, as it relates to the punter and kicker. But I think that's farther down the list to me.
And speaking of the punter, Marty Biaggi did tell me last night James Rendell has eligibility now in 2025, and there's still hope that he can get it in 2026. So they did appeal for that with the NCAA, and they did get 1 year so far added on to this year. Let's look at the USC game a little bit. Let's go through the injuries real quick. We mentioned Kingston Viliamu-Asa earlier with a knee sprain. Howard Cross, the third, is questionable again with the ankle. There's a couple of deep reserves, Bodie Cahoon and KK Smith. Do you feel like the Cross injury or and the KVA injury, we already talked about the Cross injury, do you think that could impact the game?
I think it could. I do think Cross will play. He practiced some last week, which tells me that he should be able to play this week. We'll see how effective he is. But I do think he'll play, and I think that will be important, even for as good as Donovan Heinisch has been. I think it's important to get Howard Cross back. Viliamu-Asa, I think they will be fine without. I think he's a versatile weapon for that defense that adds some, especially in like third down looks, that adds some complications for offenses. And he's not like, he doesn't necessarily stand out statistically, but I think he makes impacts other ways that maybe help other guys succeed. So I do think especially if Cross doesn't play, that would make an impact. But I think there's will still be an impact because Kingston Viliamu-Asa isn't playing.
Marcus on Monday said he thought USC was going to be their toughest matchup, and he said for a number of reasons, and he talked about, the noise about Notre Dame is the most challenging, the outside noise, not necessarily the noise in the stadium. And, you're changing time zones. There's it's a rivalry game and so forth. But if we take that out of it, Tyler, Where would you rank USC on the scale of best to worst opponents Notre Dame has played? If you could play them on a neutral field, where would USC stand in your mind among the better or worse teams Notre Dame has played?
I would go with third.
Okay.
I have Texas A&M, Louisville, and then USC ahead of Georgia Tech. I think maybe if Georgia Tech had a healthy quarterback, maybe Georgia Tech would be ahead of USC on that list, because I think I'm taking that into account. But I went with USC third. Would USC rank on your list?
I have them fourth. I have Georgia Tech ahead of them. They've been able to cobble together quarterbacks. I mean, Haynes King is kind of back. He's their change-up quarterback right now. They have a freshman, Philo, that's playing. That I watched the NC State Georgia Tech game last week. I don't know why I watch these games when they're on Thursday nights, but or Friday nights, whenever it was, but I do, and that was very entertaining. I think Georgia Tech USC would be a pretty good game, and the fact that Georgia Tech beat Miami, I mean, they've been able to close where USC hasn't. Now, in terms of USC's quarterback, they made the change a couple of games ago. We mentioned Jaden Mayava a little bit earlier in the show. He started 14 games for UNLV last year, so he's not a rookie at starting in games. In fact, he has more career starts than Miller Moss does. Do you think that quarterback changes the dynamic of this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the difference is that he protects the ball. Jaden Mayava protects the ball better. Like I mentioned, I'm not sure that the offense is as explosive with him. I think it might have been more explosive with Miller Moss. I think that the sample size is too small with Mayava at this point, but I think, especially because USC's defense has improved, the turnovers were just so killer, and that could be a huge difference in when you have close games. And so that to me is the biggest difference. I'm curious to see what their run pass split will continue to be with a different quarterback. So I don't think there's huge changes. I think Marcus hinted at it without saying it, when he's like, he makes some different decisions. To me, that's like he's not throwing the ball to the defense, but the kinder way of saying that, at least that was my interpretation of it.
Okay, Tyler, I'll let you be traffic cop here. Do we want to go to recruiting or more questions?
No. I'm not sure that there are more questions, unless I missed some. And if I missed some, restate them in the chat right now before we get out of here. But I don't see any questions.
Okay, let's go to recruiting. We're down to National Signing Day, the early signing period starting 8 days from today, and that's a 3-day period. And then almost nobody signs in February with Notre Dame anymore. It's earlier this year. Usually it's closer to Christmas. This year. Yeah. It's right before Selection Sunday and right before the portal opens. So give us the big picture look at Notre Dame right now.
Yeah, it's not very shiny.
Okay.
At this point, I think the best chance Notre Dame has, and this has been the case for a while. Linebacker Madden Faremo is the player still out there that I think Notre Dame has the best chance to land. I think Jalen Wiggins is maybe next, but I don't think Wiggins is anywhere near the likelihood of that. Notre Dame's in the conversation there with Florida. With Faremo, he's planning to visit USC this weekend. I believe that's going to be an official visit. So it would be nice for Notre Dame to properly beat up on USC to maybe help solidify a decision in his mind. But then after that, I don't think Notre Dame's going to get any of the guys that are connected to Michigan. That includes Andrew Olesh, who's already committed, the tight end to Michigan, wide receiver Derek Meadows. I don't feel good about
Meadows is going to flip to Michigan.
Yeah.
He's from LSU yet?
No, he's still committed to LSU, but LSU's star quarterback commit flipped to Michigan.
Right.
And Derek Meadows has been considering Michigan as well. So that's, if I'm guessing today, that's where I predict he would end up. Nathaniel Osu-Boateng, I think either he ends up at Michigan or Colorado. So there's not a lot.
And then the Tulane kid, what's his name?
Yeah, he isn't joining the class. Antoine Parham. That one didn't work out. He's remaining in Tulane's class. and we'll see if there's something up. Notre Dame has something up its sleeve. Notre Dame has tried to work covertly at times throughout this recruiting cycle. Marcus, I think, was asked it on Monday if he would like to have a home game later in the schedule in November, closer to signing day. And I do think that hasn't helped Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's never going to, at least in its current schedule structure, going to play a home game to end the season. But if it had a true home game last week, it could have hosted guys whereas it wasn't able to. Now, the flip side of that is that November isn't the best time to visit Notre Dame necessarily as a recruit, because the chance of bad weather is significantly increased, obviously. So I'm curious what this looks like moving forward with the early signing period so early in December, because the window, I think the way things worked out for Notre Dame didn't work in its favor, but I don't know that it would have necessarily changed significantly those things. But I think Notre Dame's just at a point where there's not much else it could do right now. Like, all of its cards have been played, and you just sort of see if you can convince anyone to get to flip or reconsider Notre Dame. So that's what's going down on the recruiting front right now.
Mike DeVoy came up with an interesting concept about, North Carolina's coach, Mac Brown, got fired today, and maybe not specific to Mac Brown, but I mean, are we too late in the cycle to be able to flip somebody with signing day being just 8 days away? I mean, you do have the February signing period too. But...
Yeah, I think especially like Notre Dame, and this could be happening behind the scenes, to be fair, but Notre Dame's going to have done a lot of legwork already on a recruit to be confident enough that it could push and get this kid in, and everything that goes into recruiting someone to sort of make a decision right now. I don't have the list of North Carolina's class in front of me. When I shared it earlier on the message board, someone asked about it. They only had 10 commits in the class. So UNC's not exactly got a very good class to pick from. We're not, I don't think there's going to be a lot of stars being plucked out of that class. I think there might've only been 2 that were above 3-star ratings. And
did that quarterback leave the class? The one that
he was still in it as of this afternoon. I don't know if something has changed since I last looked. Yeah, he's the best recruit in their class, as their quarterback. And then there's a defensive end, Austin Alexander, who Notre Dame, I believe, offered and recruited to some extent, but didn't make a serious push for. But other than that, there are no other names on that list that I was familiar with that I knew of Notre Dame having any interest in previously. And I'm not sure positionally. I could look that up real quick if there's any receivers specifically in there, but it is not a class that I saw a lot of cross recruiting from the past that Notre Dame had kicked the tires on. But I don't think this is terribly surprising. So if Notre Dame liked someone in the class, I think they could have set themselves up. So yeah, the highest rated receiver in the class is a kid named Evan Hayes from Roswell, Georgia Fellowship Christian School. That's not a name that I know of having any connections to Notre Dame, and that's the only receiver that's committed there. So I don't think that's where Notre Dame will end up trying to get an option. I think if Notre Dame only gets 3, that's what they're stuck with. I don't know that. You never know that something could happen where maybe someone doesn't sign and there's an opportunity that opens up. But I think that Notre Dame has to sort of reevaluate what it wants to do in terms of the transfer portal as it relates to wide receiver on the roster.
Okay. Well, I know I have another assignment that I need to get to. And unless you have more you want to get to tonight.
Nope. That's all I got for us.
I appreciate everybody, all the great comments and questions tonight and the side dish suggestions.
Yeah, and once again, Football Never Sleeps is presented by MyBookie. Thank you for MyBookie for sponsoring the show. And make sure you check out those Thanksgiving Day specials that MyBookie is offering.
And we will be back in our regular time slot next Monday, although maybe we should do this on Tuesdays with how many people showed up. But we will be back Monday at 7 Eastern time to do it all over again.
All right. Have a good week, everyone, and happy Thanksgiving.